Hello, and welcome to Doctor Who 50 Years Ago. This is a semi-regular podcast looking at interesting elements and seasons of classic Doctor Who as they were first transmitted 50 years ago, and looks at the differences in the show and the world it's created in then and now. I am Ben.
I am Luke.
And I'm Nick.
Welcome to this special in which we look at the character/villain/arch nemesis of the Doctor, the Master, first introduced, despite what everyone says retrospectively, in the first episode of Terror of the Autons, broadcast on the 2nd of January 1971. In this special, we will try, keyword being try, to pin down the essence of the Master, looking at stories between 50 years ago and now with the character involved, spoilers abound, determining how well the character is portrayed in various instances. So, the Master, renegade Time Lord, the Moriarty to the Doctor's Sherlock Holmes, and that's in quotes. Firstly, I'm going to use my complete history collection, which says he is a bad guy who effortlessly fits into the show. There's charm, which makes them a villain, quote, impossible to hate, unquote, which is debatable sometimes. There's humour, which is partially connected to the Pertwee era being geared to adults, apparently, as the humour for the villain is black. There's fun, in a brutal sort of way, to the character of the Master. There's one aspect that they don't mention, however, which I will, which is the potential for this to become camp, or effeminate, or exaggerated, or theatrical, or over the top. But there's one ultimate quote that really gets the original character of the Master, which we're about to start with, as portrayed by Roger Delgado. Sinister, polished, charming, has many aliases, a master of disguise, powerful hypnotist, not to be written as a villain of melodrama.
Every single adjective can be thrown at the Master at some point during his reign, or their reign, I suppose I should say. When pinning down the essence of the Master, the one thing that I think is the same in all incarnations and all stories is the exact type of story he appears in, which I shall sum up now. The Master shows up in a disguise to harness a greater power he can't control. I watched Mark of the Rani for the first time in preparation for this retrospective, and I was so shocked that he didn't turn up in a disguise and that the Rani didn't betray him at the end. But I give myself half a point because the Rani shows up in a pointless disguise. I mean, that serial in itself is kind of a... it's sort of Eric Saywood blowing a big raspberry in the Master's face, which is not an actual quote from Eric Saywood, but was basically them saying, oh, we don't actually like the Master that much, and we feel the Rani is, quote, more complex and less hackneyed, and Amy had wanted out anyway. So it's not shocking that most of the Master general traits get shoved onto the Rani.
I wonder if that makes the Master a product of the 70s and the Rani a product of the 80s.
In what sense?
Rani is a product of the 80s as a cold, calculating scientist, theoretically. It depends on how she's actually written, and all the time she's written by Pip and Jane Baker, so that might account for something. Whereas the Master originates from the 70s and is all those elements I've talked about, sinister, polished, charming, a rip out of the Sherlock Holmes book as a sort of very classic equal villain.
Yeah, this common trope of the villain who is basically the hero but a bit more evil, it appears in basically any story you wish to tell. It shows up in The Lion King when you have evil lion man in the shape of Scar. And this whole idea of him being, you know, this old school friend of the Doctor is basically in the Sea Devils, because it gets comfier in the Pertwee era as it goes on, and then completely forgotten about until the TV movie. So I don't feel that side of the Master is that central to his character. He is at core just the Doctor, but a jerk.
So he does seem to always like not consider things that are quite obvious, and then the Doctor points them out to him and causes him to lose.
Another one that I can think of is perennial favourite of mine, Legopolis, where he starts messing about with the mathematical world of Legopolis for fun, and then accidentally discovers he's knocked over the keystone of the universe, and everything starts blowing up.
It's sounding more like a Wile E. Coyote cartoon.
It is, unfortunately.
Oh no! I bought the Acme Legopolis. Oh no! I was trying to get that Doctor so I could put him into a roast dinner, but instead I blew up the universe with entropy.
And then the Doctor goes meep meep or warp, and off they go.
Former school friend side of him is not big in the old show. In the new show, those aspects of him trying to control some greater power are always still there. In a lot of them, he's talking to the Cybermen, and they end up betraying him, or he can't control them. So I would say that is the most fundamental part of him. The fact that he never works alone, and he's trying to be that Doctor's equal, but evil.
And also never quite matching the Doctor. He always never quite smashed. It's quite clear the Doctor is actually better, even if the Master is perhaps more intelligent. The Doctor's wiser, while the Master is perhaps more book intelligent.
After all, his degree in cosmic science was higher, but the Doctor was a late developer.
Or in more recent developments, the ultimate chosen one. Yes.
The one character trait I can think of that is consistent across everything is the Master is selfish. He wants power, but not for power's sake, but because it's for him. He's selfish. He wants to have control because he's selfish. It is exactly what it is.
The quote that usually goes around is, I went about to see the universe and he went about to try and rule it. But about what the Doctor does in landing in a situation, getting involved in the affairs of other peoples and planets, which is against Time Lord society, or at least it meant to be, is that not altruistically selfish in the Doctor's way, because they're also a pseudo agent of chaos in saving people and then leaving them to clear up mess afterwards?
Well, see, this is probably what the Master would think of themselves as, an agent of order, because unlike the Doctor, who comes in, that deals with something and then runs off, and we've seen episodes of Doctor Who that show that can end up the situation getting worse when they inevitably come and return. The Master would rather deal with whatever's going on to his benefit, obviously, and then long term keep control of it, wouldn't he? So he probably thinks of himself as bringing order to the universe.
I'm thinking of the case where, if anything, the Master capitalizes on the Doctor's chaos. Anyways, I'm thinking of the 3-part finale to New Series 3, where because the Doctor's managed to cause the downfall of a Prime Minister, he becomes Prime Minister in her place.
That's a New Who, and I think New Who's tried to kind of create more of an equivalence between the two in that sense.
The first era that I would say is Delgado Pratt, where he is, above all, upper class and has a sort of polish and aboveness to him. Then we have the Beavers Ainley one, where he's just some jerk. And then we have Roberts onwards. And really, you could kind of lump in Ainley and Roberts as sort of the fruity one, especially if you watch Destiny of the Doctor, where Ainley basically is just Jonathan Pryce. But I would say one of the key things about the Eric Roberts, basically once you get to that sort of the Buffy era of sci-fi, it becomes more about characterization and those more soapy elements that are kind of imported from comic books. And so the more, let's just have the Master show up in a serial, and he stomps around with a big stick thwacking people, it becomes more, oh, we have this unique thing where the trope of the hero and the hero's opposite number, they were at school together and they did that one line once where he was a dear friend of mine. That gets brought out way more in the future, probably because they were just thinking, well, we've got to do something interesting with him. That was cool and never really got anything done with. Let's do that. And I'd say Roberts onwards is where the character starts to change.
You mentioned Buffy, and yes, definitely, as the series progresses and as new writers come in, they're obviously going to be influenced by different things, and so they're going to take on the character and give them slightly different nuances whilst attempting to capture the originality of the Master's character if it was original. Because obviously, as we say, Moriarty and whatnot.
When Roberts was first being dressed, they tried to put him in the Delgado uniform, but
and
he said it was...
Put some eyelash on.
Roberts found the dress was too restrictive.
So he went for the one he had in the TV movie? Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
130 pounds of black leather. Oh yes, this isn't restrictive.
No,
it just squeaks
I was
whenever
thinking. I was thinking of the infamous line. Thinking of the Time Lord robes. Yes.
The Master starts polished and sort of upper class and above everything. Then he just becomes some fruity dude. And I have a quote here from JNT. He felt that the Rani was more complex and less hackneyed, suggesting that he thought of the Master as simplistic and hackneyed, which for Ainley is basically on the money.
Most of the Ainley stories, he is just a moustache-twirling villain in a penguin suit, isn't he?
Mm.
So how did that essence degenerate?
I agree with you, Luke, that Delgado stands on his own. I would say that the Deadly Assassin is where it changes. Yes, he's still sort of posh in that, but it's
hate keeps me alive. Quote.
Yes, his character's quite different in that, and it makes sense considering the circumstances. But I feel like that's his fall from grace. Is there? He's no longer now part of that upper class sort of public schoolboy sort of thing, because the Deadly Assassin was all about satirizing that element of British society, wasn't it? And I feel like this was Robert Holmes essentially chucking the Master out of that echelon of society, wasn't it?
He's still got like that sort of rolled R's kind of thing.
Yeah, but he's not. It's clear he's got that background, but he's lost the mannerisms. He's like, that's his fall from grace, essentially. And then that sort of signposts where he's going. And I think that's why he ends up being more fruity. I think people just took this idea of the Deadly Assassin and the Master acting a bit crazy, as you would do if you were literally just like a shriveled up husk. Be insane. You would be driven insane then. And then we're like, right, well, now he's got a body again. He'll just keep either fruity or insane or whatever. He'll never go back to being fully sane again.
So then there's the even marked difference when the New Who stuff.
Yeah, because although they have elements of the Master and the Doctor being related, it's not nearly as turn up to 11 as it is when it comes to John Sims' Master.
Roberts is when they start thinking that way. That is due to a sort of a more changing sci-fi atmosphere. They half-arse it at best.
Yeah, because it just sort of goes to the Fifth Doctor going, oh dear, it's you again, and just basically seeing him as a nuisance until that's also then canonified by J&T's thinking that the Master is hackneyed.
He was just the thing that you have. And they're not trying to think about him in any sort of interesting way. And that's all you kind of need around this era of the show's history.
There are multiple instances where it shows that they know each other quite well. The Doctor says he's his arch nemesis. Well, he doesn't say that about most things, does he? Like, he clearly that is a certain amount of respect, even if it's for someone he doesn't like. Is it the Fifth Doctor? Who is it that when he's dying, and he's like, oh, this regeneration might not work, it feels different this time. Who is it that actually sparks it? It's not his companions that make him regenerate into Colin Baker, is it?
It's the Master.
It's the Master. Taunting him is what propels him into it. And then in the 20th anniversary special, The Five Doctors, he'd rather be fighting the Doctor than some other form of evil, or not evil, some other form of opponent, as it were. They don't like each other, but also they sort of feed off of each other. It's not,
that's
again,
that family nature from the 70s coming back, isn't it? Or rather rearing its head again. Again, at the end of Terror of the Autons, I've left him stuck here on Earth. Hooray! I look forward to meeting him again.
This shows how different sci-fi was and television was back in the 70s and 80s, doesn't it? Where whenever it was any of these kind of like the drama aspect of it was always toned down, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
It was there. There were elements of it, but they didn't ever go, look, here's a big sign saying pointing to the drama like they do in the modern show.
So we have the 1970s. We have, despite it beginning to cough and splutter and slowly start to die, the age of political consensus. Anyways, where they might be two opposing ideologies, but they have slowly drifted towards the centre and have found a grudging mutual respect for one another on things like economy, society, and what have you. And then you have neoliberalism, and then suddenly the great repolarisation of British politics, where suddenly everybody's the quintessence of evil. So we've got to destroy Michael Foot or Margaret Thatcher or Corbyn or Boris. And I'm wondering whether or not that sort of very subtly impinges on the relationship between the Doctor and the Master.
That would. In Survival, the Master is pretty much at the end saying, it's time for you to die, Doctor. And the Doctor almost, thwacks his head in with a bone or a skull or whatever it is.
Is that Cold War mentality, do you think?
I think Survival is more about Thatcherism, isn't it? Which then
Absolutely.
Your point about polarization of politics makes total sense then, doesn't it? That's caused the Master to become much more violent and horrible towards the Doctor than previously, where they were a little bit, even though they were enemies, they were polite and civil with one another, mirroring society that had become less polite and more polarized, leads to the Doctor and the Master having a more contentious relationship. Ultimately, I mean, that survival of the fittest is sort of like social Darwinism, which if you don't believe a guiding hand of the state should look after people, you think that people should look after themselves. That is survival of the fittest.
Yeah, and then you're suddenly into individuals versus individuals. Yeah. Unfortunately, if there is only no such thing as a state and there are only families, then why are these families warring with each other like the Doctor and the Master?
The polarization of British politics and the breakdown of the post-war consensus gave the Master some teeth again at the end of the 80s.
Yes, quite literally. Hey!
Well done.
I just thought of that. I had to say it.
And then we move along to the Roberts era, as you suggested, Luke, where there is another shift.
Absolutely, which comes to proper fruition when RTD consciously says, I want to do a Buffy Skins sort of thing with Doctor Who. And that's what he ends up doing with the Master. Part of the things that I find interesting about the Utopia Sound of Drums story, Sim was definitely made a psychopathic reflection of what the Doctor could be. And the idea that the goatee was debated, but they decided it was unnecessary. It's almost like they're starting from those first principles again, of trying to make it that Doctor's Moriarty, but trying to bring out those childhood aspects of them, which really are the unique bits of the Doctor-Master relationship. And it's good that they were played around with. This retrospective has given me so much more respect for RTD and his ideas there. And there were these conscious efforts to call back to throughout the Master's reign. Gary Russell was the one who decided to have the Master in the young Time Lord's outfit, in the original War Games outfit, which became the young Time Lord's outfit, which makes no sense if you think about it for half a second. But you have other efforts to call back there. You have people of the universe, please attend carefully, being echoed there as well. They're definitely trying to make this a thesis on the Master.
It's a bit of upcycling. I would describe the RTD era on the character of the Master, whilst also having been tinged or poisoned, depending on your political point of view, by the polarisation of politics and the acceptance of neoliberalism under New Labour. So you have that Doctor versus Master, they're alike, but one's the quintessence of evil and psychopathic, as you've suggested, whilst the Doctor is, oh God, messianic.
With the Master now being insane in the modern show, because that's not been dropped from any iteration of the character since Sim, and now we've established that the Doctor and the Master have a much more close relationship than the original show perhaps suggested. Do we think it was felt that the Master had to become insane to justify the Doctor being friends with an evil person? Because the classic show didn't really have any problem with presenting the Master as just a bad person and the Doctor having some respect for an evil person, essentially. Do we think that the culture has changed in these 50 years?
Well, it's interesting that in The Timeless Child, the Master is basically the Joker rather than a reflection of Jodie. The more they're hyping on the childhood aspect, the more they are hyping on the insanity angle. So there definitely is some sort of connection there.
Yeah, so if we're going to take this Timeless Child bit forward, the reason he's insane in that section is because everything he ever knew and everything she ever knew was a lie, i.e. their entire relationship. That the fact that they were never equals at all, which obviously comes out of left field and whether you like it or not is another story. But it's a further stamp of establishment on how the Master is insane and the Doctor is very, very good and messianic again.
When you look at John Sim, they took a few bits that were whispered throughout the classic show. You got that bit in the Five Doctors, you got the line in the Sea Levels, etc., and it blew them right up, and we've got to have it the most ancient childhood connection, and it's gone way out of control, and oh, I have a connection with you. Let's breathlessly talk while I'm outside a subway.
So instead of writing him as a villain of melodrama, the show has, for want of a better word, electrified and over-dramatised the Doctor-Master relationship.
100%.
To which the audience either goes, oh, that's very interesting, or, oh, okay then. Which is in itself a different form of polarisation, but on the audience, which is not necessarily a good thing.
In answer to my question, you would suggest that it's not so much people have a problem with the Doctor being friends with an evil person, it's that they had to just amp up the drama, because people want more drama nowadays than they did back 50 years ago.
I would say they want meatier character drama, as opposed to the sort of the ludicrousness sometimes of the plots of the 80s. That's more the shift we're going towards these days. I would say it's a falsification to say people want more drama. I would say that the character stuff is what we're more interested in, and you have to amp up that character stuff. And in fact, the Doctor's character has been amped up as well. Waters of Mars, where he decides to save some people, that's like the biggest thing ever. If you're gonna have the Doctor be that elevated,
there is an equal and opposite reaction as a reflection on the society that is watching it.
RTD does openly admit it in Utopia, doesn't he? Because he basically has Delgado 2.0 in
Derek Jacobi.
Yeah, and in Derek Jacobi, and you get a little glimpse of the old Master, and then he's like, well, no, I've got to be young because this Doctor's over the top and young, so he regenerates, doesn't he? He explicitly says that.
The Master has changed, but then so has society, and that's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, because then there is an awful lot of, it's not even upcycling here, it's just pure recycling from Chibbers' entry, where we have fleet refugee humans sent somewhere, but lol, it's into the clutches of the Master in The Timeless Children. Oh wait, I've just talked about Utopia. Whoops. The Doctor and the Master have a fight on some beach. oh wait, that's the ultimate foe. The Master tries to trigger the Doctor to blow them up, a la the Time Monster.
So Moffat tried to do something additional with the characters. He said Luke with Missy, which was an evolution of what RTD did, the Buffyization of it. But it seems that now what's happened is RTD is now the holy grail of Doctor Who. And what's happened, we've reverted back to the John Sim Master, essentially.
The recycling that I mentioned.
Yeah. The unreconstructed John Sim Master from 2007, ignoring all of the development that the characters had in the last decade. It isn't Buffy the Vampire Slayer that we're all looking up to, it's Russell T Davies from the mid-2000s.
We cannot conclude on this podcast where we're all present and agree that Russell T Davies was brilliant.
But
it was
this is
all
the
the world
conclusion that we are coming to in lieu of certain circumstances, because the perfection was oh so great that the current show feels it deemed acceptable enough to utilise and recycle. Not upcycle, but recycle.
I will say, I'm not saying I think he was the best writer of Doctor Who. I'm more explaining that in terms of pop culture, in terms of what does the public think, that was the most successful period of Doctor Who since the 70s. So,
for good or for ill, yeah.
Yes.
There were original elements of the Master which we absolutely love. This then seems to be evolved or degenerated into a figure of fun in the 80s. And then it evolves again into 90s Buffy Vampire Slayer pseudo-demonic Master, because the Doctor has become messianic as per connections to how the British political scene and British society has evolved from 1971 to 2021. And so what we seem to have discovered is that there are many differences and changes despite there being the same character called the Master in Doctor Who 50 years ago and today. And that's the one we're currently stuck with, whether you like it or not. Thank you very much for listening to this special retrospective character in-depth study on the Master. You can find us on Blogspot, which redirects to iTunes. You can leave positive comments there, it helps if you like. You can also find us on Facebook and YouTube, where you can like, comment and subscribe. We're now going to return to hibernation and awake, like the Silurians, to find the future. And if you could make it not terrible, that would be great. But until then, I've been Ben.
I've been Luke.
And I've been Nick.
Thank you, and goodbye.